Welcome to this video, which serves as an introduction to public management economics. The video will provide an overview of economics, specifically microeconomics in the context of public policy. It outlines the different components of public economics that are covered in later videos such as consumer and producer theory, market structures, game theory, and policy applications. We discuss key concepts such as marginal analysis and opportunity cost, but we'll also cover the difference between nominal and real prices. This particular topic will lead us to the issue of inflation, which has been at the center stage after the COVID-19 pandemic. Economics studies how resources are produced, consumed, and distributed among individuals and groups in a society. At its core, it's about the efficient allocation of scarce resources that could have alternative uses. To make these ideas concrete, economists rely on models which are mathematical representations of individuals, firms, markets, and so on. Importantly, models are simplified, meaning they include only features relevant to the problem at hand, not every detail. Empirical work is used to test theory, with statistics serving as a key tool. But statistics alone does not make someone an economist. What matters is the integration of statistics with economic theory. For example, in financial economics, we study portfolio choice or asset pricing using concepts such as risk aversion, arbitrage, or market efficiency. In macroeconomics, on the other hand, tools from dynamic optimization, like intertemporal choice models, help us understand savings, investment, and consumption over time. Economics is usually divided into two main branches. Macroeconomics deals with national and international issues such as unemployment, interest rates, government spending, economic growth, inflation, and trade. Microeconomics, on the other hand, focuses on the decision-making of individuals and firms, and it provides the foundation for much of modern macroeconomics. Note that in this class, we are going to focus mostly on microeconomic concepts. Economic concepts are not abstract. They shape daily life. Almost every decision we make has an economic dimension. Even the decision to get out of bed in the morning can be explained in terms of costs and benefits. That is, the marginal benefit of staying in bed eventually falls under the marginal cost of being late for work. It is important to acknowledge both the limitations and the power of economics. On the limitation side, traditional university curricula often focus too narrowly on neoclassical models of rational, self-interested individuals. This perspective can overlook tools available to address major challenges such as financial instability and environmental pollution. Yet, economics is also powerful. It provides a framework for analyzing trade-offs, anticipating the effects of government interventions, and improving societal welfare. For example, profit maximizing behavior can be compatible with correcting externalities like pollution. With the right policies, such as regulation, pigubia taxes, or incentives, market failures can be corrected and economic efficiency can be restored. Now, economics is not confined to abstract models. It covers an enormous variety of real-world applications. This and the next slide are selected examples taken from the American Economic Association webpage. For each example, you have a link to the original paper analyzing the problem, and in most cases, you also have a link to a research highlights article summarizing the findings in easily digestible wording. For example, economists study altruism, exploring why people give to charity. They analyze asymmetric information, such as why doctors' medical choices differ from those of patients. Other examples include deadweight loss, for example, whether gift exchanges waste resources, and of course also externalities. They show, for example, how electric cars shift pollution from one state to the other. Of course, economists also study financial crises, like the risks posed by interconnected banks. They are particularly interested in incentives. In the case presented here, they look at whether parents are timing birth for tax purposes. The breadth of economics extends further. The economists analyze market concentrations, such as the limited competition in the smartphone market, which may actually lead for not enough smartphones being produced, or put differently, for smartphones being very expensive. They examine what is called signaling, meaning that while restaurants with excellent inspection scores sometimes prefer to keep them quiet. They study subsidies, for example, when governments encourage energy-efficient light bulb adoption, and other themes include taxation and its relationship to growth, the role of technology in causing unrest, and the effects of trade policy changes like NAFTA or Brexit on global markets. Finally, unemployment and its hidden dimensions, such as how the housing boom may have obscured manufacturing decline, are central research areas. Those examples are just a glimpse at what economists do and demonstrate that economics touches nearly every policy question. Now, let us have an overview on public management economics. Public management economics focuses on microeconomic concepts relevant to public decision-making. The topics include consumer and producer theory, demand and supply, market structures, and game theory. Public management economics also examines market failures and the role of public policy, the influence of risk and uncertainty, and dynamic aspects such as intertemporal decision-making. Note that case studies will link those theories to applied areas like taxation, environmental policy, market structures, and also non-profit management, among others. Now, let us look at each of those topics a little bit more in detail. Consumer theory examines how individuals maximize utility, how demand functions are derived via utility maximization, and how policy changes affect consumer well-being. But note that we are not only looking at policy changes, but also at income and price changes in general. Producer theory is the counterpart to consumer theory, focusing on profit maximization, or sometimes cost minimization, and the derivation of supply curves. Both consumer and producer theory are central to welfare economics, because they show how resource allocation by individuals and firms influence the overall welfare of society. In the context of economics, welfare or societal welfare is measured for both consumers and firms. The terms that will be used in the later videos are consumer surplus and producer surplus, which, if combined, add up to social welfare. Now, what most people think about economics is covered in the section on demand and supply. Markets operate where demand and supply intersect. At equilibrium, price and quantity adjust so that there is no excess demand or supply. Economists ask how demand and supply changes when prices change, and how to distinguish between a movement along a curve versus a shift of the curve itself. Examples include the price for high-end bicycles and how it relates to the market for carbon fiber. Specifically, a news article in the mid-2000s stated that the increased demand for carbon fiber in airplanes and European wind farms, note that the blades for wind turbines or for wind farms are made out of carbon fiber, that this also has an effect on high-end bicycles, since those are made of carbon fiber as well. Another example would be the changes in the corn market due to the increase in ethanol production. Once demand and supply are covered, we shift to the analysis of market structures. Market structures differ in their degree of competition. Perfect competition is the benchmark. Many buyers and sellers, with no one able to influence prices, lead to efficiency. At the other end, monopoly and monopsonies occur when a single producer or consumer sets prices. Oligopolies lie in between, with few dominant producers. Here you can think, for example, of Airbus versus Boeing, or of common factors, and there is strategic interaction among those producers. So those oligopolies are a little bit more difficult to analyze. And here, this is where game theory comes into play. Game theory studies strategic interaction among economic agents. Every game has three components: players, actions, and their respective payoffs. In public policy, examples are plenty. Political parties that compete with each other may face a so-called prisoner's dilemma when negotiating budgets. Voters sometimes behave strategically, choosing candidates not because of direct preferences, but based on expected outcomes. Other examples are citizens that free ride on public goods like clean air, requiring government intervention. And agencies or government agencies compete for financial resources and shaping how policies are implemented. Note that public goods in the context of economics does not refer to goods provided by the government, but refers to the characteristics of the good. That is, once a good is provided, you cannot exclude someone from using it, and there is no limit on how many people use it. For example, if I install streetlights in my street, then those streetlights would be considered public goods, although I paid for them. Now, a large topic in this context is going to be market failures and public policy. Basically, market failures occur when we fail to achieve an efficient market outcome, and public policy plays a central role in correcting these failures. Externalities like pollution can be addressed through regulation, so-called Pigouvian taxes, and tradable permits. Public goods, such as defense or street lighting, require government provision. Imperfect competition, such as monopolies or cartels, justify antitrust policies. Asymmetric information, such as in health insurance markets, call for mandates and disclosures. Note, asymmetric information occurs when two parties enter into a contract and one party is better informed than the other. And of course, lastly, we have also missing markets, what are called so-called missing markets, in the sense that we have a good that is demanded by, for example, consumers, like clean air and clean water. However, there is no market price associated with those goods. Now, the last two topics are going to be risk and uncertainty, as well as dynamic aspects in economics. Now, risk and uncertainty is central to decision-making. Consumers face uncertainty about income, firms about future demand, and investors about returns. Examples include health or crop insurance markets, where government often intervenes through mandates or subsidies. Households must decide how much to save for retirement under uncertain income and return streams. Firms make investment decisions without knowing future demand, and even consumers face uncertainty about product quality, which can be addressed through labeling and safety standards. We are going to have a look at how consumers and firms make investment decisions, or any decision, under risk and uncertainty. And finally, the last topic, the dynamic aspects in economics, includes time or considers time as a component. Here we are going to talk about first the net present value, in the sense that we can link future dollar values through discounting and compounding. Next, we are going to talk about intertemporal decision making, which involves shifting consumption across time through saving and borrowing. Concepts like time preferences and consumption smoothing explain why households do not spend all their income at once. Resource economists provide further examples, from optimal extraction of non-renewable resources to the sustainable management of renewable ones, such as fisheries and forestries. Now, before we talk about nominal versus real prices, let us introduce some key economic concepts. Here we are going to talk about marginal analysis, sunk cost and opportunity cost, as well as elasticities. So let's start with marginal analysis, which is at the heart of economics. The principle is straightforward. If the marginal benefit exceeds marginal cost, total benefits rise. If marginal cost exceeds marginal benefit, total benefit falls. When the two are equal, total benefit is maximized. A practical example here is speeding. Driving faster may save you time, but increases accident risk and also the risk of getting a ticket. Note that if you're driving, say, a mile below the speed limit, that means that if you are increasing your speed by 1 mile, there's very little risk of getting a ticket, and hence the marginal cost is zero, whereas you're getting a benefit from driving a little bit faster. Next, we're going to talk about sunk cost and opportunity costs. Now, sunk costs are past expenditures that cannot be recovered. They should never influence future decisions, though people often fall into the sunk cost fallacy. Opportunity cost is the value of the best alternative foregone. A university education costs not only tuition, but also the salary one gives up by not working. Opportunity costs are central because every resource used for one purpose cannot be used for another. An important example regarding opportunity costs is the salary of university faculty. Opportunity costs can lead to significant wage differentials in the university setting between business and law school faculty and other professors. Faculty in business and law school can have significant earnings in industry. Universities must overcome those high opportunity costs to pay them a higher salary in order to retain them. And finally, we are going to talk about elasticities. And note that all the topics I'm covering here are going to be covered in great detail in later videos. Now, elasticities, in a very simple term, measures responsiveness. Specifically, how a percentage change in price translates into a percentage change in quantity. An example comes from transportation. When rail safety investments raise ticket prices, some passengers may switch to road travel, which in turn increases traffic fatalities, or potentially traffic fatalities. Elasticities capture those behavioral responses. The last topic considered in this introductory video are nominal and real prices. In order to get us started on the topic, consider the following example. In time period 1, your income is $100, and the price of apples is $5, and the price of milk is $10. At those prices, and given that income, you're going to purchase 4 apples and 8 gallons of milk. In time period 2, your income is $120, and the price of apples and milk is $6 and $12 respectively. Again, you're going to purchase 4 apples and 8 gallons. Note that your nominal income increased from time period 1 to time period 2 by $20. However, you can purchase only the same amount of goods since the prices also increased by 20%, and hence your real income remained the same. If your income were $110 in the second period, then your nominal income would have increased and your real income would have decreased. This example illustrates that it is very important to differentiate between nominal and real prices, since we only care about real prices because you cannot really eat money. Now, let us start with index numbers and indices before we talk about inflation and various price indices. An index number condenses multiple values into one figure to track trends. A series of index numbers over time forms an index. Those are crucial in economics to distinguish nominal from real values. Familiar examples are the Consumer Price Index, more on that soon, the Dow Jones Index, or the S&P 500, with the latter two being stock market indices. Now, there are four important price indices to convert nominal dollar amounts to real dollar amounts. Different indices capture different perspectives. The Consumer Price Index tracks the cost of a fixed basket of consumer goods. The Personal Consumption Expenditure Index adjusts more flexibly with actual spending patterns, and I will soon give an example of how this translates into reality. The Producer Price Index, on the other hand, is specific for producers and tracks the cost paid by producers. For example, the electricity cost for industry is different than the electricity prices charged to consumers. And the fourth important price index is the so-called GDP deflator, which covers all goods and services produced domestically as well as imports. Now, the Consumer Price Index is published by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and the definition by the BLS says that the CPI is a measure of the average change over time in the prices paid by urban consumers for a market basket of consumer goods and services. The approximate weights in a market basket, which comprises about 80,000 items, is heavily weighted towards transportation and housing. So you can see that housing represents about 43% of the expenditures, and transportation is about 17% of the expenditures. Note that urban consumer represents about 90% of the US population, meaning that the term is relatively broadly defined. In economics, it is essential to focus on real rather than nominal values, and the CPI is one of the most important tools for making that distinction. As mentioned before, the Consumer Price Index and the Personal Consumption Expenditure Index both measure cost of living to consumers. The CPI and the PCI price index, though, differ in their construction. For example, the CPI uses a fixed basket of air routes for airfare, whereas the PCE uses passenger revenues and miles traveled to calculate the cost associated with air travel. The PCE is generally broader, using more comprehensive data and allowing for revisions. This makes it a more consistent time series, and hence, this is also why central banks prefer it over the CPI. Now, let us have a look at how the CPI is actually constructed. Suppose that you're going to the supermarket in a particular year and that you're purchasing goods and services. You're purchasing goods and you're filling up your shopping cart, and that shopping cart costs $68. Then 365 days later, you're purchasing the same items and exactly the same items, and this time the shopping cart costs $71. Hence, the CPI is calculated as the market basket in time t divided by the market basket in the base period, that would be a year ago, and hence you can see that the CPI would be, for this year, would be 104.41, meaning that the price increase was 4.41% compared to previous year. The CPI is used as an economic indicator and also as a policy target. You know that the CPI numbers are closely watched every month now. The CPI also serves as a deflator for other economic series, meaning that you can translate nominal to real values, and it is also a means of adjusting dollar values for policy purposes, such as adjusting pension payments. Now here in this slide, you have on the right-hand side, on the left-hand side, you have the evolution of the Consumer Price Index, the CPI for all items. This is the most general CPI, including the entire market basket. But then the CPI can also be composed into various items and also geographically. Here I have plotted the CPI associated with energy products, and you can see that the CPI associated with energy products is actually much more volatile than the CPI for all items. Note that this volatility will soon play a very important role. On the right-hand side, you have an example of the producer price index, where you have one series that represents the PPI for all items, and then you also have the PPI for construction materials. So there you see that you had a sharp increase at the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, we mentioned before that the CPI, and note that this is true for any type of price index, that you can use it to convert nominal dollars into real dollars. So here I have put the equation that is required on this slide. So the ND would be the nominal value in time period t, and then CPI in the base period, and the CPI in the period that you are interested in gives you the dollar calculations, or the constant dollar calculations. Now, to put this equation into perspective, let us actually make an example. And what we are considering are gasoline prices over time. Specifically, we are considering the gasoline price in May of 1979. Note that many people compare the gasoline prices of today to gasoline prices when they were young, saying that gasoline prices today are, say, $3, whereas when they were young it was 50 cents. Note that this comparison doesn't really make sense, and to put it into perspective, you can also think about a Rolls-Royce Silver Ghost, which in 1921 cost $12,000. And today, for example, a Toyota Camry is about $25,000. That doesn't mean that a Toyota Camry is more expensive than a Rolls-Royce in 1921. But it turns out that if you're actually calculating the constant dollars, that the Rolls-Royce was actually close to the price it is today. So here, let us go back to the gasoline example, where you have the gasoline price in 1979 to be 84 cents. The CPI in May 1979 was 71.5, and the CPI in July of 2025 was 323.048. So here, in order to calculate the gasoline price in 1979 in terms of 2025 dollars, what you do is you take the 0.84 times the CPI in the period of interest, the time period of interest, that would be 323.05, and you divide it by the 71.5, which is the CPI in the period in 1979. And you see that the gasoline price in today's dollars was actually $3.80, okay? And when you're looking at the actual price of gasoline today, you see that the gasoline price in May of 1979 was actually higher than it is today. Hence, using nominal terms, nominal in this case would be the 84 cents, and comparing it today to today's dollars is misleading. Now, this is often the case that you see in newspapers or also on TV or online, is that people are posting nominal dollar values, despite the fact that those dollar values are meaningless. So here, the red line indicates the nominal dollar value from January 1976 to today of the gasoline price. And you can see that if you're actually applying the real value, that the gasoline price was not, for example, in 1980 was not around $1, but was probably closer to $3 or $3.50. Okay? So there is a significant difference in gasoline prices if you are actually comparing the nominal to the real value. Now, gasoline prices are one aspect of cost of driving, or the cost associated with driving. Now, another argument would be that if you are really interested in comparing the 1979 gasoline price to today, that would also require that you're actually comparing the fuel economy of driving or the fuel economy of a vehicle, of a typical vehicle in 1979. Of course, fuel efficiency has made significant progress over time, and hence the cost per mile, this is actually what economists would really be interested in, and not necessarily the price of gasoline, since we care about how much it costs you from getting from point A to point B. You see that due to fuel efficiency gains, there has been a significant decline in gasoline or in the cost per mile driven. Okay, and note that here that the cost per mile is actually is measured in cents and not in dollars. So this is a typo here. Now, if you're plotting nominal values or nominal dollar values instead of real values, then this can be misleading, as you can see here. And this is an application for public finance or public policy. So you can see here the Wisconsin fuel tax revenue over time. And you see that if you're measuring it in nominal terms, that it has been steadily increasing over time. However, if you are converting it actually into real values, you see that it peaked around the year 2000 and that the dollar value has since declined, or the fuel tax revenue for Wisconsin has since declined. Note that this is also something that is observed in other states that have not adjusted their fuel taxes in recent years. Now, of course, there are problems associated with the CPI, and we have touched on them before. For example, there is what is called the substitution bias, in the sense that if the price of one good increases, consumers shift away from that good and purchase prices that purchase goods that are lower priced. We also have the issue of new technology, in the sense that new technology enters into the market and that are usually higher priced and replace older goods that are lower priced. There are also changes in quality, in the sense that new products are usually of better quality or have different amenities, and that failing to take into account those quality improvements has an effect on the true cost of living. Now, the last topic that we are going to discuss, and that has been very important, is the inflation. Note that the monthly inflation rate reported in the news is the percentage change in the price level of the CPI over the 12-month period. When I say the change in the price level, that is a change in the CPI, in the sense that the CPI can be calculated using the equation that I have provided here. So we can do this as an example, in the sense that the inflation in April of 2021 was indicated with 4.2%. Now, the CPI in April of 2020, 12 months before April 2021, the CPI was 256.192, and in April of 2021, the CPI was at 266.832. And hence, the increase or the difference between those two numbers represents the 4.2%. If you remember, a couple of slides ago, I showed you the evolution of the CPI for all items, and I've also shown you the evolution of the CPI for energy. Now, it turns out that food and energy prices are very volatile, in the sense that bad weather and the subsequent decline in crop prices can increase food prices, or fluctuations in oil supply triggered by OPEC can also have an effect on energy prices. Since food and energy prices are very volatile, economists usually exclude those items from the CPI and calculate what is called the core inflation. The core inflation excludes food and energy prices from the CPI when calculating inflation. If you are including all the items, then we are talking about headline inflation, which includes food and energy prices. It is very important to remember that food and energy are central to households, and hence there is a little bit of a disconnect how economists or central banks calculate inflation, in the sense that they're excluding two items, food and energy, that are extremely important for people. But think about the core inflation being the trigger for any type of policy intervention by central banks, which is the reason why, since they're so volatile, and more importantly, since that volatility can be very short term and has nothing to do with the economy as a whole, that those are excluded from the calculations. Now here I have I'll show you the inflation rate that if you are using the personal consumption expenditure index, where the red line indicates the personal consumption expenditure index for all items, including food and energy. And then you also have the green line representing the personal consumption expenditure index without food and energy. Okay, and you can see that there were time periods, especially in the early 2000s, where you had significant fluctuations associated with the PCE, including food and energy, and that the food and energy, when you exclude food and energy, that the PCA is much smoother. So this concludes the first video that is giving you an introduction to public management economics.